of the planet. The TBS special presentation, next.
One of the best shows ever.
Welcome to the TBS special presentation. Tonight, the drama continues as Gaia warns William that the future of Earth hangs in the balance. William Shatner and Faye Dunaway as the voice of Mother Earth, voice of the planet. The TBS special presentation.
Hit escape.
I did. Nothing happened.
Gaia. Tanguche.
A computer hacker has broken into the system.
I know that phrase.
Damn. It may sound crazy, but that hacker haunted me. Always leaving the same signature. Gaia. On my computer at home, even in my dreams. Seducing me to Nepal. I left a cozy academic position at Caltech for what? A Buddhist monastery at the foot of Mount Everest? A funky, argumentative computer.
Look, I know about your book, your frustrations. You'll need my help. Trust me. Come here. I want to show you something.
How did I get here? Who wrote your programs?
Someone's controlling you.
Answer me, Gaia.
I had a dream of light versus darkness. There were people fleeing from fire, fires from beneath, meteors from above.
You dreamed last night?
I don't know. A bird started to sing so sweetly, and I awoke to light pouring in through a window. Outside, precious life was blossoming, and darkness had been dispelled. I see something.
What do you see?
15 million years ago, the entire Pacific Northwest was submerged beneath 200,000 square miles of lava. Lava a mile deep. Now look at it. A sweet paradise of evergreens. Broad expanses of fresh water. Glacial ice pouring into the life-strewn fjords. Just as the glaciers are constantly churning, so too the land planet is perpetually undergoing change, rebirth. Mount St. Helens is one luscious power point in this eternal game of change.
I wouldn't call it luscious. A cubic mile of summit was displaced, and the blast exceeded that of Hiroshima. The explosive gases were spread throughout the Northwest. Vast stretches of timber were mowed down in an instant by hurricane-force winds. The entire watershed was destroyed, and with it countless millions of creatures. Human lives were also lost, while whole towns disappeared in ash and in flame.
You're missing the point.
What is the point of such catastrophe?
What you call catastrophe is actually evolution. The atmosphere, the seas, the soil demands such destruction. There is no life without inferno.
There's nothing very pleasing in my eyes about pain and disaster and all that pollution. These are things my species would like to avoid.
You fail to see the magic lurking beneath the mayhem. Soon after the eruption, billions of bacteria of all shapes and sizes appeared in the warm, nutrient-rich streams flowing down the scoured slopes. For these minute creatures, the entire volcano was like a gourmet grocery store. The hot ash of the 1980 eruption has ripened the soil, inviting spectacular biological rebound. Millions of insects burned out of the sky during the eruption were turned instantly to precious fertilizer. Enormous amounts of nitrogen, carbon, and potassium have entrenched the soil. The very scientists who studied the aftermath of this eruption know precisely what I'm referring to, William.
Given the magnitude of the disturbance, our expectation was one of very little survival. Yet as the more we looked, and with time as rains and caused erosion on the slopes and the ash washed away, plants began to appear throughout the area, and animals in many cases as well. So our initial expectation of total destruction was quickly proved false. And one of the initially surprising things here is the amount of survival and the speed of the recovery in very, very many places. There are very few places at Mount St. Helens where we can categorically say there was no survival.
I'm sure this is all most interesting if you happen to be a microbe or a flower. But people may not be able to recover from disaster with as much ease as the Earth. And what happens when one species takes on the power of a volcano, of thousands of volcanoes, and starts spreading those same gases and chemicals all over the planet overnight? My species has created a whole new level of disaster in the form of over 6 million newly developed chemical substances, most of them totally unstudied, unmonitored, found in every human thing we touch and depend upon. At least 350,000 of these chemicals are known to be carcinogenic. 6,000 new chemicals invented every week, out on the streets, in the air, everywhere. Synthetic dominoes, not part of the normal evolutionary game plan, as you call it.
William, spare me your nobility. Call it pollution, call it brimstone. The Earth knows it to be salvation. This Earth spawned a life game that is conditioned by constant turmoil. A planet perpetually under siege. New chemicals, new insults, new changes in climate, new biological priorities. You are a part of a pattern that's obviously much larger than yourselves. And that pattern includes a rash of pollution.
You're telling me pollution doesn't worry you?
There's little your species can do to the planet that hasn't already happened. Never forget the tilefish.
All right, you win. What's the tilefish?
The most adorable little inhabitant of those Atlantic waters of yours. Just off Long Island, when the Gulf Stream shifted one foul night in 1882, the water cooled, and 1.5 billion of the poor little critters perished, more than would ever die from all of your overrated pollution. That's nature. Big deal.
It is a big deal.
The Earth created ants, termites, and people. Well, there's more gaseous pollution issuing from the stomachs of ants and termites than from all of your human smokestacks combined.
That's a meaningless analogy.
There's acid rain in bumblebee urine.
I'm not impressed.
There are naturally occurring toxic metals in Australia.
You're reaching.
The Earth has even created its own plutonium reactor just beneath the bedrock of Central Africa. There are countless species of grass and insect that show a marked preference for waste dumps.
Your euphoria is irrelevant.
William, I'm speaking of polluted environments that induce natural selection. DNA did not grow up on the warm, luscious sands of Waikiki. Evolution had its biggest boost in the adverse seas of the polar regions, where a multitude of new species originated. Pollution is as much a blessing as the sun's radiation, despite the problems radiation may cause for your species.
I can't accept that. Would you ignore our human industrial debacle? Hundreds of thousands of factories pouring out poisonous grime every minute?
William, if the truth be known, the whole planet hails pollution. Natural gas, ozone, hydrocarbons, methane, aluminum, beloved sulfur, everything.
It's one thing to muse and rhapsodize on a global scale, but my species acts locally. Your euphoria ignores our local dilemmas. Like the sulfur you so proudly hail. I mean, this Canadian nickel refinery spews twice as much chemical garbage into the air in 1 year as did Mount St. Helens. By 20 years ago, this plant had wiped out all surrounding vegetation. The sulfur emissions and tailings destroyed every flower, every tree. A lunar landscape ensued where once existed lush Ontario forests.
And how do you explain all that current vegetation surrounding the factory?
The flowers have crept back because higher smokestacks were built, 1,200 feet high. The sulfur is merely discharged over a much wider area. The danger is spread in less concentration, and our survival is at stake.
The Planet continues with Faye Dunaway as the voice of Mother Earth.
We are what we breathe. And we breathe it in 15, 18 times per minute. Unfortunately, much of the air we breathe is not oxygen. We're a species that could go up in smoke. In a power plant like this one, There are 175,000 pounds of steam and saturated gas erupting like a volcano every hour. You may minimize the impact of sulfur on a flower, but its impact on my species has nothing flowery to recommend it. The only legacy is one of pollution-induced disease. As animals, we need love, food, and water. But we need oxygen, even more so. And we are fouling that oxygen. We spew over 5 billion pounds of pollution into the air every year. There are cleansing mechanisms attached to the stacks and designed to scrub away the pollution according to the weight of the pollution particles. But it's the sub-micron-sized particles, like lead, that get away, deep into the lung, or high into the stratosphere, where our chemicals are eating a hole in the ozone layer and causing a greenhouse effect which threatens the stability of all life on the planet. Closer to home, those chemicals are playing havoc with our bodies, eating away at our lungs. As a result, we're succumbing to lung disease and every known cancer.
With more disease, more destruction, the next generation improves, like a broken bone that gets stronger as it mends. Whatever your species does or dreams of doing, whatever it thinks or breathes or eats, will only serve you in the end. It is all part of nature's game plan, a mysterious jungle of possibilities.
That jungle is filled with asphalt, along with hundreds of thousands of dangerous, even lethal chemicals that we've invented.
It's a chemical war zone out there. Are you familiar with cities like Cubatao?
In southern Brazil?
That's right. One of the most polluted cities on Earth. There are dozens of chemical plants that belch out their poisons into the skies. Over 900 tons of chemical pollution rain down upon the city every day.
Most human cities are like that.
Yeah, but in Cubatao, 40 out of every 1,000 infants are born dead. And another 40 will die within the first week of life. At one time, the mayor refused to live here. A wise choice, as the World Health Organization recently declared that no human should spend more than 24 hours in Cubatao. It's the first city in biological history to have no birds or insects of measurable quantity. The rivers that flow through the city were pronounced dead. Yet the workers come in droves, goaded on by some of the highest blue-collar salaries in all of Brazil, about $400 a month. Nevertheless, most of the nearly 100,000 residents of Cubatao live in dreadful slums. This one was built on a gas line, which some years ago burst and killed several hundred people. The city had the slums rebuilt, back on the same gas line. My species never learns.
You're wrong, William. Human beings are superb students of disaster. But I have data that suggests you've come a long way. The name is Jamaica Bay.
You're referring to the wildlife preserve?
Yes.
I'm glad you chose that as an example. Once this region was a haven for wildlife, for egrets that fed on blowfish, for ospreys in abundance. Eels
thriving in the deep sound, along with unseen but numerous plankton and shrimp. Perfectly adapted players in the food chains of Long Island. Fertility at its best. But that paradise didn't last. Because these marshes were thick with mosquitoes, people sprayed DDT to control them for nearly a quarter of a century. Chemicals accumulated in the mud and water and ended up in the largest predators, the birds. DDT has had a disastrous effect on birds, interfering with their ability to produce healthy calcium. For every osprey chick that survives, many others never have a chance because their eggshells can't form properly.
That was news 30 years ago when your colleague Rachel Carson wrote her book, Silent Spring. Today, the birds are coming back. And so are the mosquitoes, I'm happy to add. People everywhere are waking up to environmental problems.
You're naively optimistic, Gaia. We still sell DDT all over the world. At home, other insecticides, like the highly toxic lindane, have replaced DDT. Our legal and economic system supports this onslaught of molecular mutation. In cities like Los Angeles, where millions of supposedly rational human beings live, the laws favor pollution. I've had a love-hate relationship with LA for years. All 4,000 square miles of it.
Given your general flair for ideas, your sterling disposition, and obvious health, one would assume it to be a beautiful environment to grow up in.
You're being facetious.
You're eager to find fault with an environment in which you were raised with apparent success.
The city has the worst air quality in America, producing over 12 million pounds of dangerous pollution every day. In its frenzy to expand, LA manifests its own weather patterns. It creates more dust, clouds, fog, and rain, and less wind than the outer perimeters. Much of LA's water and power and resources are extracted from as far away as Mono Lake and the Four Corners region of New Mexico, where this energy plant smoke plume is visible even from the moon. Closer to home, the city's vital statistics stink. 2.5 billion pounds of garbage every year for a starter. LA automobile traffic spews out 6,000 tons of pollutants every day. It's sad to think that once LA was a wilderness. Not just LA, but the whole world looked, smelled, and tasted pure. Deep forested canyons. Sparkling sea. Surrounding desert. Pristine sand dunes that provided the habitat for such creatures as this delicate little butterfly known as the El Segundo blue. For millions of years, ever since the first flowering plants staked out this territory, the butterfly held its ground. Now the butterfly makes its final stand for survival against the world, according to Los Angeles. Its habitat pitifully reduced in size and quality to less than 1 acre.
At least someone has tried to save the last few.
Several miles away, in a zoo, the last of the giant condors are dying out. These gentle, ancient beings can no longer function in Southern California. It's become too poisonous for them. when even your scavengers are disappearing, then you know you got a problem. LA comprises more concrete and glass and steel than it does living things. As a result, the city generates its own enormous amounts of energy, equivalent to 8% of the sun's total output striking the surface area of the city.
Impressive.
Perhaps, but that same man-made energy imposes great stress. 60 cycles per second of alternating current. Twice the natural wavelength of human cells. Such alternating current may be skewing the DNA molecule, which for a few billion years prior to Sunset Boulevard was in better balance. What I'm saying to you, Gaia, is that Los Angeles is causing sickness among its life forms. Whether giant condor or human, 90% of all cancers are environmentally induced. Along LA's much coveted beachfront, there's been intense concern over data pertaining to cancer-inducing toxins in the water. Despite the increasing poisons in Santa Monica Bay, people continue blindly to enjoy this Southern California coastline. They even consume fish like the white croaker, known to contain high levels of PCB contamination.
And you know how many millions of pounds of sludge are pumped into the ocean here, making this the most toxic, cancer-prone patch of seaside on the entire Pacific?
What possibilities for genetic mutation? You may be launching a biochemical bonanza in Santa Monica.
More likely a dead end.
The Salemia radi.
What the heck is that?
A cute and delicate clam that lives within the turgid hydrogen sulfide of the Santa Monica sewage outfall. 5,000 of them per square meter thriving in LA's toilet matter.
Well, I'm sure that they've evolved over time to live in environments which are very high in decaying material. And what we've done with pollution is just create their ideal environment on a larger scale than it normally exists.
The more gross it is out there, the happier the clams are.
Regrettably.
May I remind you that anchovies produce more excrement in the sea than all you Los Angelinos combined. Think of that the next time you eat a Caesar salad.
I appreciate the reminder.
My point, William, is that man-made pollution in Los Angeles might be the biggest boost to coastal evolution in North American history. Just think of it. I love this town. The tumult, all the traffic, chemicals, bacteria. More people, more energy.
Your glitzy reading of LA ignores the perverse downside, which affects everyone who comes here. My dad sacrificed his life making a living in Los Angeles.
The Planet continues with Faye Dunaway as the voice of Mother Earth.
I was never allowed inside that plant to see what he did. Mom said it was no place for children. Every day before dawn, Dad was out the door, unhappy. Every evening after dark, he came home, unhappy. He was always too tired to play with us kids, and then he started having to go to the hospital. He was coughing blood. As a child, I blamed the factory. I later learned that the factory was okay. It wasn't a bad guy. Los Angeles was the bad guy. The government was the bad guy. It didn't even begin regulating air quality until 1971. The problem is that there's no disease specific to air pollution. No well-defined microorganism that can be traced. The chemicals combine in hopelessly complex and dangerous configurations that nature has never seen before. And that chemical monster is forever shifting in the air and water and food chains, wafted by wind, absorbed by plants. People habituate to pollution. After a while, they hardly even notice it. Their minds have become polluted, and this vicious syndrome is evident in their sluggish acceptance of an increasing catastrophe unfolding all around them. Over 100,000 people die in LA every year as a direct or indirect result of pollution. That's incredible.
You humans are mere amateurs when it comes to pollution. The Earth is still supreme in that arena. Don't think for one moment that the Earth is not totally in biological and chemical control. It is.
I guess Dad harbored a whole different idea than the conventional paradise that you seem so eager to rhapsodize.
I'm sure he would have appreciated those beautiful flowers and those lawns. Did you know that lupin plants and lawns in LA have learned to love the smog? I adore the botanical glamour of Beverly Hills.
Life was no bouquet of roses, believe me. No shopping spree on Rodeo Drive. No dream cottage on the beach. Take in a movie, a Hollywood Chinese, carry out once a week, and that was the extent of the glamour.
You're bitter.
A lot of my friends died of cancer in this town.
Will you lighten up? This is my first guided tour of Southern California, and I'd like to enjoy it. This was the home to Charlie Chaplin, Clark Gable, Harold Lloyd. Land of opportunity. What part of town did you grow up in, anyway?
East LA.
Oh, charming block.
My first girlfriend, Jamie, lived in that house right there.
She cute?
Oh, yeah.
How old?
18.
Did you love her?
I did, actually. Never told her, though.
I used to come up here when we were in high school. Mess around. God, it was beautiful. You know, it hasn't changed.
We'd climb these trees. Or sit on this rock in the shade in summer and dream.
It was wonderful.
Yes, it was.
And this is where you first kissed, Jamie. And you felt something in the coolness of the grass, and at night, in the wind, as crickets throbbed, you also throbbed. You knew that life was eternal. And you touched her body, and she touched yours. Her hand had hot, beating blood, and the blood of your own hand, the blood of your hearts, merged there in the sweet, luscious grass.
Yes.
And all of nature came into your nostrils. The mellow blue skies, the dark, undulating earth, until you slept 1,000 years and tasted the outpouring sweetness of a woman.
Jamie. Jamie, is that you?
even in L.A., in the heart of polluted Bedlam, a man can fall in love with a woman. The whole earth is pouring forth with undeniable sweetness. Just as a flower blooms in the ash of Mount St. Helens, your love bloomed in the polluted morass of a human city. When all the pollutants settle into the soil, you'll be left with the permanence of that love, that beauty. It is what I admire about your species. The fact that you have the capacity to make an art form out of life. The city of Venice, capital of the High Renaissance, attests to that art form.
For your information, Venice is one of the most polluted cities in the world. Dozens of chemical factories are spewing forth hundreds of untreated toxic chemicals day and night.
You're preoccupied with doom and gloom.
Try reality.
Reality is a celebration. I see human beings as celebrants of life. A brilliant species that has soared above your so-called pollution, the petty little puffs of smoke and sordid grit of civilizations. The great Venetian artists excelled in transcending such grime. They preferred to focus on great dreams, miraculous light, all that is radiant in nature. It's your choice, beauty or ugliness.
I have a hard time connecting Renaissance art with pollution.
You insist that pollution has curtailed your species, perhaps, but your most lasting art is your true salvation. It's no coincidence that some of your finest pollution and greatest art coexist in Venice. It was here that painters sought to elevate the world around them. To see the world clearly as something beautiful, something original and sanctified, in spite of human pollution. The whole city is a tribute to the purity of that art.
Scientists recently analyzed the specific chemicals raining down upon Venice. The list is not pretty.
Which are atrazine, dimethyl, mercury, and so on, until 12 chemicals. Now, in this moment...
Cancer rates have doubled amongst Venetians in the last decade, though no official reports have yet been released by the Italian government. The achievement of this great city, with its spirit of art, perfect light, pastoral landscape, blissful nudes, aesthetic saints, is now sinking in the polluted sea of carcinogens. The canals, at one time key to the pastoral vision of Venice, are now rank with malodorous sludge. The great sculptures are pockmarked and corroded, a result of the noxious sulfur dioxide in the air. And Venice is only one of many disastrously polluted regions in Italy, a country fast becoming the dirtiest in all of Europe. The golden dreamscape of ages past has become a nightmare. On July 10th, 1976, in the sleepy Italian town of Seviso, just north of Milan, a crucial pressure valve in a highly toxic chemical plant ruptured. It was around lunchtime. People were at their leisure. Hardly anyone took notice of the fact that something had gone wrong at the chemical plant. High into the air over Seveso, the rupture had released a faint cloud of lethal dioxin. Wind caught the white ash and spread it over a radius of 50 miles. Dioxin is used for making soap. It was also the primary component of the infamous defoliant Agent Orange, used against the Vietnamese. Children who were out playing got the dioxin ash on their faces, hands, in their eyes.
Our great fear was that we would wake up one day, after the few hours we slept, to find out that people had died. Above all, the children. We needed to find out what was happening. We needed to know if the liver was functioning, if the kidneys were functioning, if the spinal cord was functioning, if there was a disaster. An extremely dramatic problem. Right away, what was observed was that animals were dying. Suddenly, after the cloud had escaped in the sky, the leaves turned yellow, the trees had yellow leaves with yellow spots, birds, rabbits, chickens began to die, and many people had burns on their faces, on their hands. And after a few days, it was clear that beside the chlorophenol, there was TCDD, known to be the most poisonous substance in the world.
Hundreds of thousands of animals would die, birds falling right out of the sky.
This was indeed a tragedy, but not so very different than the situation at Mount St. Helens.
I'd hardly compare the two.
We were considered lepers, carriers of the plague. There was total isolation around us. No one wanted to be with us anymore, to talk anymore.
These details are very unpleasant to me. It would make logical sense under the circumstances to bury the plant.
That's precisely what American chemists recommended doing. Burn it, then encase the remains in concrete. Over a period of a decade, that is what would happen.
Then what's the problem?
There's much more to the story. During the many months following the disaster, no one knew what they were dealing with or how to contain the spread of the chemical. The experts' own distress set off a series of anguished indiscretions. Controverting Roman Catholic dogma, medical authorities pressed for widespread abortions. But what is most insidious is the realization on the part of everyone in Seveso that the long-term effects of the disaster are totally unknown. What's clear is that the chemical which nearly destroyed Seveso can move unimpeded throughout the whole food chain.
There is always a strong tension of having lived, of living still next to the contamination zones.
This young man was afraid to be recognized by his neighbors for speaking out against the events of the chemical spill.
In the coming years, problems can arise. My father suddenly came down with an illness. His death happened 8 years after 1976. It was because of an intestinal cancer.
Long-term human effects might take 50 years to show up, while those contaminated wait for cancer to appear. For third-generation infants to be born without limbs, with central nervous system afflictions, or to be stillborn.
This is fundamental cause and effect. Your species lives medically within limits, exceed those limits, and accept the consequences.
Gaia, it may be easy for you to speak in such stark, logical terms. But my species is vulnerable. We're in the dark. How do we explain this disastrous legacy to our children?
To Voice of the Planet, starring William Shatner.
It is unlikely that Italian bureaucrats will ever own up to the legacy of Seveso. Since after World War II, Italy has systematically pursued industrial stardom and is quickly becoming one of the wealthiest nations in the world, at the terrible price of trashing its whole environment. The Plano, as it's called, that broad plain south of the Alps, stretching all across Italy, is a morass of pollution. The number of disasters are increasing, and so are the protests from Italian chemical workers, over 50% of whom have quit their jobs throughout the country.
Dico la verità perché sono uno della Resistenza. La Resistenza dovrebbe continuare contro la disoccupazione, contro i ladri, contro il terrorismo, per un mondo migliore e il bene di tutti.
At the town of Massa, not far from Pisa, another chemical plant exploded in the summer of 1988. It was the height of the tourist season, but the beaches were evacuated. The water is now larded with some of the highest concentrations of chemical contaminants found anywhere in Europe. But the dilemma is not unique to Italy. My species is contaminating the whole planet.
No kidding. You're pushing your luck. Why fight your own place in the natural balance?
We have no choice. At Bhopal, India, for example, another chemical valve ruptured. 3,500 innocent people died. 200,000 people were injured.
You have a choice.
Look, these chemical spills are happening more frequently every day. At Chernobyl, a nuclear meltdown resulted in the radioactive contamination of most of Europe. From the Greek islands to the Scandinavian Arctic, high levels of radiation were recorded in the aftermath of this unnecessary Soviet disaster. There's nothing to say that humanity won't simply die out. Looking at Chernobyl, at Bhopal, at Seveso, one gets the impression that we are the plague species.
It's not the chemicals, but you humans who are out of control. William, the precise chemical in question at Seveso, dioxin, is used in the making of hexachlorophene soap?
Correct.
Dioxin causes cancer?
That's right.
The answer is clear.
What is it?
Stop using hexachlorophene. Humans have been washing and cleaning themselves for thousands of years without hexachlorophene-saturated soaps. You created dioxin with your minds. You might have abandoned the idea with a little foresight. You will live or die depending on how you use your mind and heart. Life remembers by definition. Give life half a chance, and it will survive. You may be a horde of meddlers, sadistic tamperers, precocious inventors, children, in other words. Seveso certainly suggests that, but you are not the last word. I don't know if you're even very good, or if there will even be time to find out. Certainly the legacy of Venice offers hope. So do you, I might add.
That's very flattering of you.
Who you are, William, is not what you've done, but what you've dreamt.
Singled out the paintings of Giorgione. Sensitivity, genius. capable of this. Give us a chance.
Give yourself the chance. Otherwise, you might be the shortest-lived species in the planet's 4.5 billion-year-old history. That would be very sad. For Jamie's sake, and for mine.
Gaia's warnings are sobering. Are we as a species on the brink of extinction?
The Planet continues with Faye Dunaway as the voice of Mother Earth.
How much time do we have left?
Prior to the emergence of Homo sapiens, calculations pertaining to biological perseverance were not difficult. Even among your most recent cousins, there was calm logic legislating the endurance of species. Such logic holds that 98% of all species go extinct. However, 2% will always survive.
How many plant and animal species will die out?
Approximately 500 million species have already vanished forever. That number translates into a natural extinction rate of 300 species every million years. In the past, extinction was the inevitable result of population dynamics and planetary flux. But the extinction rate is rapidly increasing. The data is coming in from all over the planet, William. Your species is solely responsible for escalating that kill rate by 1,000 times. Your massive arrogance is reaching out to every corner of the Earth, even to the last continent, Antarctica. In the Antarctic, the impact is just beginning. You still have time to stop it, to learn from it. In the name of science and curiosity, you have treated this continent of perfectly adapted animals as a mere laboratory for exclusively human endeavor, regardless of the consequences. This is blind arrogance, William, and it has the look of a military invasion. You come by air and by sea to a world whose pure connections have not been altered in millions of years. Your species arrives with new plans for Antarctica. So far, you've built 57 scientific base camps around the continent, like the U.S. McMurdo Station. Absurd testaments to manifest destiny. Taking no notice of the surrounding fragility, you spread inorganic remains. You discard your garbage in heaps, right in the middle of penguin rookeries, like these at the Argentine base Esperanza. Or you burn your garbage in open dumps, such as those at McMurdo. The chemical residues and smoke permeate sensitive animal communities, utterly unprepared for this new onslaught of pollutants. Offshore, you dump your bilge tanks. The oil slicks infest waters where marine mammals will mate, killing them rapidly and painfully. Or the oil washes up on shore, causing more deaths. Despite the enormous size of the Antarctic continent, there are very few ice-free regions suitable for nesting sites or for the mating of Antarctic bird and seal species. Yet these scarce nesting sites are precisely where the human settlements have been built. There is competition for space and unnecessary conflict. At Base Esperanza, scientists allowed the dogs to kill off over 100,000 penguins. Today, a single penguin is left from that previous rookery. The conflict between humans and other species in Antarctica is increasing. Helicopters are frequently flown directly over the rookeries. The penguins flee the helicopter, thinking it a giant predator. In their panic, adults are separated from their young. Eggs are crushed. Eventually, with such increasing pressures, this rookery will also go extinct. In 1989, this Argentine tourist ship hit rocks and sank a mere mile offshore exposed penguin colonies. The ship emitted thousands of gallons of fuel oil into the water. the oil will likely destroy the entire food chain in the region, from smallest diatom and krill to penguin, seal, and whale.
Is there a solution, Gaia?
The solution is obvious, William.
Now return to Voice of the Planet, starring William Shatner.
The tragedy of the Antarctic is symptomatic of a much larger problem, a human problem. The forces of darkness are combating the forces of light within you. In their reenactment of this struggle, the monks seek to scare away the demons. But they have ignored something.
What have they ignored?
William, the demon is within you.
What's happening to this poor animal?
In 1984, employees of the University of Pennsylvania inflicted head injuries on a number of baboons for the purpose of studying such injuries. You call it biomedical research. I call it murder. The animals were not anesthetized and died terrible deaths. Your federal government fined the university $4,000 and suspended the activities of this particular laboratory. Your few laws do virtually nothing to protect animals. Because of greed, you would destroy the Antarctic. In the name of science, you are destroying the whole world. Nearly 500,000 animals are maimed, tortured, and killed every day throughout the world in the interests of your so-called moral and good intentions. Yet there is not a single complete cure for any human ailment that can be said to have derived from animal research. What cured TB in guinea pigs caused it in man. And while guinea pigs have no problem taking strychnine, a minute dose kills a human being.
Come on. You're choosing images that exaggerate the reality of medical research. These mice, for example, are invaluable in the study of AIDS. Would you rather use dogs or humans to study rare genetic diseases?
William, a dog will normally live about 15 years. Put it in a cage, and it dies of misery and exasperation within approximately 4 years.
What about poisonous insecticides? Or potentially hazardous household goods? Or harmful chemicals, toxins, cosmetics? You want to try them out on rabbits or children? And yes, animal brain research causes pain and discomfort. But the pain would be far worse and more widespread if not for such scientific inquiry. Based upon the glaring evidence of human destructive impulses throughout the world, it would seem the more we understand our own animal impulses and vulnerabilities, the better off the world is likely to be.
Your heart has been tainted by the terrible arrogance of science.
You stop animal research, and all of modern medicine will grind to a halt.
Every species on Earth will grind to a halt if you don't learn to live harmoniously with all other life forms. Treat other animals as unfeeling objects to be discarded and consumed, and you will go on treating yourselves that way. Can you not feel its pain?
The llama had a nightmare last night. I saw him struggling in his bed.
There's ample reason for concern.
What are you saying?
These monks sense something wrong with human beings. They wouldn't be praying for Buddha's deliverance if they didn't.
What do they sense?
Your species is currently experiencing more nightmares than at any other time in its history. The subconscious fears are beginning to surface.
What makes you so sure?
I can hear it.
What do you hear?
I hear the cries. I can feel it.
Tell me what you feel.
Something strange and far off. Hints of disaster from every living creature, from every plant. I feel something disturbing in the air of Brazil.
Be specific.
Changes in the river, the soil, in the forest, where I've always been rooted.
Roots can be washed away. The enormous population pressures of a poor Brazil are threatening the surrounding forests.
It's something else. Something incalculable about your species.
Tell me.
You know precisely what's happening.
Tomorrow night,
She had a different fate in store for me.
Gaia gives William the greatest challenge of his life, the dramatic conclusion of Voice of the Planet. 8:05 Eastern on TBS tomorrow night. The Planet continues with Faye Dunaway as the voice of Mother Earth.
The place of origins. My childhood. There, in the dirt and mottled light, beneath the colorful gaze, in the very lap of wildness. Three and a half million square kilometers of rainforest here. Half of all the tropics. Half of all oxygen, carbon, moisture. Half of all living species on Earth. This is the overwhelming genetic repository for all future evolution on the planet. Your destiny is woven in the vines of this very canopy, a whole universe unto itself. I grew up at the juncture of these sublime forces, in nature's most treasured and timeless refuge. Once you humans also lived in harmony with the jungle. See that circular village woven from palm thatch? These Indians have always lived in the balance of the Amazon's genetic wild strains, of colorful plants that give you ritual, meaning, pleasure. Their intimate knowledge of the jungle provides them with everything they need. They have lived beneath the warm canopy of fruit trees for at least 5,000 years, in the lush shadows and dripping hours of original creation. You must have seen them in your dreams, felt their bare feet passing over the tangle of the jungle floor. Even their names are free and wild. The Yanomami, the Kayapo. This man, he hunts, he fishes, he farms the tropics. He is good to them, and they are good to him. His weapons change with the times, but they are simple tools, tempered steel, aged wood. A Surui Indian taps the rubber tree. These people have long known the limits of the forest, how much to take, when to leave it alone. It is not man and nature, but man as nature. Do you remember, William?
The Indians are in trouble, Gaia. Strangers came first for their rubber, then to take them as slaves. Look at the villages now. There's no longer any harmony with nature here. There's squalor, as in any city slum. This village represents the Brazilian government's proud attempt to bring the Kayapo into the 20th century and bestow upon them all the blessings of the modern era. There is infinite sadness here. Sure, on the surface, there are still vestiges of tradition. The anato fruit is still used to provide dyes for ritual body painting, the merging with the forest. They still make their traditional baskets. And all the while, the children play in the river, as they've done for centuries. But beyond such effects, look at the new fiber of their life. These Indian populations have been systematically assimilated or eradicated since the onrush of the Portuguese in the 17th century, when the Amazon Indians numbered nearly 7 million. Today, there are less than 125,000 of them. They've been victim to rape, murder, the deliberate introduction of viruses, and the destruction of their habitat. The changes will go much further than just diet, although that alone will bring problems. These people will lose their identity, their culture. Although peace and tranquility pervade this scene, don't fool yourself, Gaia. Cancer is spreading. The Indians of Brazil are on the brink of annihilation. Soon, the songs of the Kayapo will no longer be heard.
We now return to Voice of the Planet, starring William Shatner.
Even the clouds that blow over the Amazon are different now. The whole jungle is held hostage by a berserk biochemistry. The destructive force is overwhelming. In one satellite survey, 26,000 square kilometers of the jungle were on fire. The loss of moisture in these trees might have a devastating impact on the Earth's climate. At least 25% of the global greenhouse effect can be attributed to this pyromania. The rich diversity of the forest is burnt away to nothing. A single species of grass will be planted. And for what? Where forests once were, cattle now graze to supply meat for the fast food stores of the West.
Please, stop.
Every second, a football field worth of ancient forest is being obliterated. By the year 2000, many scientists foresee complete ruin in the Amazon. The forest ends up here, in factory yards where the trees are turned into produce so Brazil can try and meet its debt repayments to international banks. But that debt and Brazil's inflation rate are escalating so rapidly that the whole forest is entrapped in a vicious cycle of destruction. The Trans-Amazon, a 70-meter wide swath, a product of bulldozers and earth scrapers tearing into the jungle, replacing the language of birds and wind with truck and car convoys, and migrant workers searching for a dream. And for many, that dream is some dreary neighborhood on the outskirts of a town like Porto Velho. This is the new Brazil, conjured up in the 1960s by 4 generals and 2 wealthy civilians who declared that colonizing the Amazon would transform this country into a virtual paradise. Other settlers have moved even farther into the once virgin jungle. They clear away the forests by burning and slashing. Then plant crops the Indians would laugh at. Crops that don't work. Nothing works. Despite the lush growth of the rainforest, the Amazon basin has some of the poorest soil in the world. The nutrients are stored in the living vegetation and passed back down to the soil. Cut the trees, and you break that cycle. They create a desert, and they call it progress, achieved with a $629 million loan from the World Bank. Brazil is sitting on a time bomb. Exploitation by the rich and massive poverty have triggered a chain reaction of such disasters.
Would you have me believe, William, that such destruction is merely the result of economics?
Yes. That's what money, or rather the lack of money, does to my species. There has always been an elite minority of landed gentry, wealthy industrialists, and shopkeepers in Brazil. They have remained isolated from the problems of their countrymen, but not for much longer. Poverty has infected the Brazilian mind, the Brazilian ecosystem. The chain of life is being severed in every direction. That's why the urban poor are willing to believe that the Amazon holds some measure of promise for a better life.
William, based upon all the destruction you have described, I perceive as many as 15 million species that may be doomed in the Amazon within the coming decade as a result of human behavior. Do you realize what that means?
I can guess.
I can't even guess. Except to say that the first to go may be another primate like yourselves. One of the most rare and endangered primates in all the world. The Muraqui. This furry beauty is the largest native mammal in Brazil, in addition to man. There are only a few hundred left, and they have never bred in captivity. As for its smaller relative, the golden tamarin, they too have been reduced in number to the point where their future is in dire jeopardy.
We're trying to preserve their genes and breed these animals in sufficient number to eventually release a healthy stock back into the wild. It's become a primary goal of all biological science.
I wish you luck. The Muraqui and tamarin, like everything else in the Amazon, are going to die. Your science has not served to halt the destruction. Virtually none of the Earth's tropics or the vulnerable species therein have enjoyed any kind of human respect or preservation. And even those few meager reserves have been subject to attack by poachers. These animals are prey to the aggressive and inhuman forces at work in your species, in your heart, in your brain. Aggression that is escalating every minute. When I think that these delicate creatures, the magical result of millions of years of earnest evolution, are being wiped out overnight for no good reason. William, what kind of species are you? And as for those few primates that you hope to revive, even if you were successful, there will be no wilderness left in which to release them. With equally stubborn and unthoughtful behavior, you are fostering your own annihilation. In the last 50 years, your species has waged some 80 major wars. You have caused the senseless deaths of over 100 million people. Now, you have tens of thousands of nuclear weapons. You are catastrophe connoisseurs. You think Hiroshima was bad? Let me tell you something, mister. Hiroshima wasn't bad enough. You had a profound opportunity in 1945, but you didn't learn from that opportunity. You didn't see the light.
We now return to Voice of the Planet, starring William Shatner.
First atomic blast. But your species is among the least radiation resistant of all organisms. Radiation destroys your nervous system, your bones, every living cell. Now, you may have that horrible opportunity again. Nearly 20,000 weapons will detonate. The war will last a few minutes, I suppose. Enough time to kill nearly everyone and everything. A clean slate, save for a few radish seeds and cabbage, amoeba and bacteria. Initially, the radioactive dust and toxic soot will be too thick to permit much of any sunlight. Every chemical and toxin you possess will be incinerated, adding to the fires and creating a nuclear winter. Then comes the big day. Several months after the war, the fallout will have mostly settled. With 70% of the ozone layer gone, the sun will suddenly pour its blessing on an unprotected Earth. There will be no way to record this blessing. No film, no people, no eyes. All surviving animals and insects will go instantly blind. Their wings will have already turned to wax. No remaining flowers will ever be pollinated. The ultraviolet light rushing in to scorch the earth will inhibit all photosynthesis in the oceans and jungles. Those hearts and minds of the human race will be forever extinguished, replaced by a species of tormented ghosts. Dreams turned into nightmares, vision turned into darkness. An organism that had achieved paradise, suddenly reduced to a cold wind, burnt and withered memory. Total horror. There will be no more Amazon, no more magic, and your kind will forever be expunged. There could never be another species quite like you. Your music, your wit, ironically, your very love of life. And I don't know if I have the energy to start all over again. William, I see it all. The evil begins with human laziness. Please, do something!
What?
Wake up!
We love life. We also want the cold Amazonian headwaters of peace and eternal childhood. I want it for my own boy and his kid. I want it for the jaguar and the python. I want it for the red howler monkey and the green parakeet. I want it for the blue sky and the stars at night. I want.
You, Gaia. Do you understand?
I understand, William.
How does a species improve itself?
Search within your own soul and teach your children, as this woman is doing. She survived Hiroshima, but she lost everything. Everything but hope. Her memory of that fateful day is still on fire. Today she has come to impart that fire and a message of peace. These children, innocent descendants of a tragedy that must never happen again. You must extend your loving heart to the whole of creation. You are the shepherds. It's solely in your power to spread love on this earth.
is time for us.
Yes,